Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, everybody. I hope you enjoyed Fourth and Frames just now that just finished in their Scott Fishbowl 14 mock draft with Jack Lusney. It was an awesome draft. If you haven't watched it already, go back on our YouTube channel and watch that whole thing. It is fantastic. And I hope you all enjoyed Dynasty 365, where we had Russ from fantasycares.org join us to talk about draft strategies and dynasty strategies and all sorts of strategies when it comes to Dynasty Fantasy Football. But now we're at the main event. Now we're here to talk about what you all want to hear about, which is IDP Fantasy Football, hard-hitting tackling, bringing quarterbacks to the ground, smashing fantasy football players that will really help you have a good time playing fantasy football this year. Got Gary Davenport with me. We're going to be talking about our top 15 defensive linemen / edge rushers. So before we get to that, let's get to this. Gary Davenport, how are you doing, my friend?
Oh, I am well. Glad to be here. Things are starting to heat up. Calendar turns to July. Scott Fishbowl draft starts. Next thing you know, it'll be August. Draft season will be in high gear. Fantasy Football Expo. And then September, and life as I know it ends for 4 months.
Right, pretty much. I hear that. For those who don't know, Gary put out a piece for us here over at fantasyandframes.com. 5 for $5 early IDP value picks. If you go to fantasyandframes.com, check out those players that he is recommending you go after in your IDP fantasy football leagues. Trust me, you won't forget it. And while you're there, check out all of our other articles at fantasyandframes.com, as well as our rankings. And then, of course, wherever you're watching us and or listening to us, subscribe, hit a notification bell, comment. Let us know what you really think of what we're doing here. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, and what you want to hear more of and less of. And we'll do our best to accommodate you and bring you the content that you all enjoy. I'm trying to think of like relevant fantasy football news that's going on in the world of the NFL. But I think, Gary, we've hit the doldrums of the calendar year. Would you agree, or is there something that just jumps out to you? It's like, ooh, we got to talk about.
There's nothing that I can really there's trade rumors floating around involving 34 different guys, but right now, we're kind of in between OTAs and training camp proper, so
right.
It's a little bit of a dead spot, but it won't stay that way for long. Before you know, it'll be the first day that teams put on pads, everybody will fall in love with at least one guy. And then one guy will have one bad practice session. That'll be the end of him. He sucks. He's washed up or won't ever be anything. Or been telling people for 15 years, just don't overreact to one workout or two workouts. I mean, that's not to say you shouldn't stay abreast of what's going on and that you shouldn't pay attention to current events and use those when valuing players. But people, oh my God, we love to overreact to stuff.
Yes, we do. And something that we might be reacting and overreacting to, obviously, as we go through our early, and I stress early top 15 redraft edge rushers / defensive linemen is, what do we make of teams, or I should say players at those positions going to brand new teams? You have Daniel Hunter going to the Houston Texans now. He's being an edge rusher across from Will Anderson. You have Jonathan Grenard going to Minnesota. You have Andrew Van Ginkel going from the Dolphins, who had a strong year when Jalen Phillips was out, going to the Vikings. They just drafted – is it Verse they drafted, or am I forgetting who the rookie out of Florida State, I believe.
He's in with the Rams.
Rams versus – okay. Well, the prominent rookie whose name is escaping me, that's totally deflating my comment or soliloquy right now. They address the positions. You have these new players going to new teams. Gary, for all your years covering IDP Fantasy Football, and let's stick with the Houston side, a player like Daniil Hunter going to a new team, new situation. Dallas Turner in the chat. Thank you very much, Sean. does that really impact how you rank these guys? Or, when it comes to edge rushers, you kind of look at, how well they beat their blocks, how well they get to you get those pressures, get to the quarterback. And it's like, well, you can take them out of one team, plug them into another team, and they should still be productive? Or is scheme kind of a limiting factor here?
This is going to be a lovely answer, but it depends. I mean, it depends on the player. It depends on the scheme that he's going to versus the scheme he was in. Is it something completely different? Is it something that he's got familiarity with from the past? And, it depends on who's going to be that guy opposite him on that new team. I mean, is he someone who's going somewhere where all of a sudden he's the unquestioned number one edge rusher and a guy who's going to see a lot of attention from opposing offensive lines? Or is he, like in the case of Danielle Hunter, he's going to a Houston Texans team that also has the reigning defensive rookie of the year in Will Anderson. So, those guys take pressure off one another. Glancing at my top 15, I think I counted 4 guys among my top 15 not playing for the same team as last year.
Nice. And for those who have questions about the rankings in terms of the early 15 that we'll be talking about, please drop them in the chat, whether you are on X, whether you are on Twitter. I try and say X, Gary. I try and get on the board the link, but it's always going to be Twitter, or your YouTube channel, or on Facebook.
Yeah, they didn't change YouTube to like Q or something, so it's not X.
Yeah, not yet.
Just stop. Yeah. Please no. Can we just
stop it?
Yeah,
just stop
with the one-letter names. That's like Meta. No one calls Facebook Meta, or no one calls the company that owns Facebook Meta. No one calls it that.
Yes, exactly. I need to herald back to when Mike Ditka was on the Sunday NFL show on ESPN, where he's like, "Stop it!" I want to get that GIF and always use it when I see something crazy on the interwebs, where it's just like, "Come on, let's slow down. Let's slow down here." All right, let's get into our top 15. I guess we'll we went over our linebackers last week, JT and I. So if you haven't watched that, go over to our YouTube channel or listen to wherever you listen to podcasts and hear what we have to say as far as our top 15 redraft linebackers early rankings.
Azeez Al-Shaair better be in there. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, he was actually. He was my. He was my 15th actually, so he was right there.
All right. All right.
Okay.
Another guy that went to Houston.
Yeah, he's exactly. And here's the thing: like I originally was concerned with Cashman, but Cashman's gone. Then you have Christian Harris, who they drafted a couple of years ago from Alabama. Like, what do they think about him? You got Henry To'oTo'o from last year, but I mean, Azeez Al-Shaair since his time in San Francisco, when Greenlaw went out, like he's just been the consummate tackling IDP linebacker that you want on your roster.
He knows Ryan's defense. They're paying him $13 million a year, which is not the kind of money you pay to a guy that you want to be your second or third linebacker. No, they brought him in to wear the green dot, make the play call, because it was a revolving door with the dot last year in Houston. I mean, To'oTo'o had it for a little while. Harris had it for a little while. Then Cashman came on and had the year that got him to payday for Minnesota. So, I thought I look for Azeez Al-Shaair to build on what he did last year. He had 160-something total tackles last year. It's just the assist to solo ratio was a little closer to 50-50 than we'd like it. But I think he'll finish higher in IDP this year than he did last. And I think he's a guy that has top 10 potential that you'll be able to get sometimes well into LB2 territory. So just like I was banging the drum for him last year, I'm right back at it.
And for those who are newer to IDP and are wondering why Gary brought up the solo to assist, it's because in most IDP scoring, you get more points for solo tackles than you do assisted tackles. So you definitely want to have that solo to assist ratio a little bit higher. Colby Conway here, Texans talk. Give the people what they want. He is an adamant.
Yes, he is.
And for those who don't know Colby, you can check out his work over at Fantasy Alarm and in other places. So yeah, he is not wrong. We are giving you some Texans talk. We may give you some more Texans talk as we go down our list of top 15 linebackers. So without further ado, Gary, why don't you start us off here? Who is your number one defensive lineman / edge rusher for 2025?
This seems like a pretty easy question to answer. It's got to be TJ. It's got to be TJ Watt.
Yeah,
I mean, there just aren't any other players where you look at it and you're like, okay, 20 sacks is an unreasonable expectation, and he's going to get you solid tackle numbers to go on. It's just there isn't another defensive lineman that has his ceiling. There isn't another defensive lineman that's really especially close. So TJ Watt is going to cost you. I mean, I don't believe he made it out of the first round of the Buckets draft last year. So he is going to be, if not the first IDP off the board, one of them, depending on, what your league scoring looks like and whether maybe a linebacker like Foye Alua can beat him to it. But yeah, Watt's an easy number one. And you know how much that pains this Cleveland Browns fan to say, but it's got to be TJ Watt.
No, I'm right there with you at number one. And it's interesting, the reason I brought up, players going to the new teams is because for me, that's actually brought some players down in my rankings that had they been where they had been for previous years, they'd be right at the top. And you look at consistency in terms of scheme, you look at consistency in terms of coaching and location. I mean, nothing's changed for TJ Watt this year. Everything is going to be the exact same as it was all the other years he's had success. And so I think it makes sense to just have him there. Going to number two, similar scenario. Jim Schwartz I believe he's back for another year for the Cleveland Browns, which is why Myles Garrett is at my number two spot here for defensive end edge rusher. What are your thoughts on Garrett?
Oh, I love him. He's my number three. I have one guy ranked ahead of him, but reigning NFL Defensive Player of the Year. He's going to go out and get you at least, barring a significant injury, at least 13.5, 14, 15 sacks. He's got a high floor. You wish the tackle numbers were maybe a little bit better, but Myles Garrett, I mean, from a football player standpoint, I don't know if there's an edge rusher in the NFL I'd take over him. His his natural ability is mind-blowing. Watching him come around the edge, and people talk about bend with defensive linemen when you would get into the weeds and we start getting dorky. His ability to get that low to the ground and come around a corner that fast before an offensive tackle even knows what has happened, you can't teach that. You can either do it or you can't. And not many people can do it at the level Myles Garrett does it.
All right, so if he's your three, who's your number two defensive lineman / edge rusher?
That would be Max Crosby of the Las Vegas Raiders. And the reason I have him slightly higher than Garrett is we've seen Crosby give you that 12 or 13 sack season, but he puts up the kind of tackle numbers that you just don't see out of defensive linemen. And I love that floor that it gives you. You don't have to worry about those weeks where if a guy doesn't get you a sack, you could be looking at the dreaded IDP donut. Crosby's going to go out there and get you 5 or 6 tackles. I mean, every game. And it's just, I love that floor. And it's awfully close. I'd put TJ Watt in a tier unto himself. But like the 2, 3, 4 guys, there's not much separating them. I mean, they're all elite DL1, just not quite TJ Watt.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. We got a question here from the Worst Sports Channel, a.k.a. Jack Lusney. Could Jalen Carter be a top 5 breakout candidate this year? I'm going to assume he means in defensive tackle specific leagues versus just defensive lineman leagues. What are your thoughts here, Gary?
I think top 5 might be pushing it. I do expect a much better season out of him this year, and I think he could turn into a dependable weekly starter, but there's some awfully good interior linemen, that make up that top 5. So it would be difficult for him to crack it, especially since I expect the Eagles love to, even though that they've had some personnel changes this offseason, but they're still a pretty deep off defensive line, and they love to rotate those guys in and out because from an NFL perspective, it's good. It keeps those guys fresh and ready to go in that fourth quarter of a close game. They're not winded and, that half a step late that allows the opposing quarterback to get the pass away. So I can't go top 5, but I do expect that he will be much better in his sophomore season.
So Jack was also dropping in the chat that it is it's on Sleeper where they do not differentiate between defensive tackle and defensive end. So he's asking from just a mere defensive end position. We've seen guys like Aaron Donald. We've seen guys like Justin Madubuike. We've seen guys like DeForest Buckner. I don't think Jalen Carter is yet at that level to be saying he is the top 5 overall defensive end or defensive lineman there for Philadelphia for the reasons Gary just listed off right there. All right, we got Colby back in the chat. Yeah, well, shocker, another Texans question. Okay. He says, curious who is ranked higher, Will Anderson or Danielle Hunter? So I have for me Hunter over Anderson.
Me too.
By a few spots here.
And it's not, I mean, Anderson, won Defensive Rookie of the Year last year, but his numbers were not, and that doesn't surprise me. Even the best, you go back and look at Myles Garrett's rookie season, and the numbers he put up are really similar to what Will Anderson did last year in Houston. Whereas we've seen Danielle Hunter hit 15 sacks how many times? I mean, more than once. I think he's has an 18 or an 18 and a half sack season. And he's going to a situation where, I know he's not getting any younger. And yes, I know that Hunter has an injury history. But if he stays healthy, playing opposite Anderson, which is going to keep double teams off of him, that could be a scary pass rush. Not to get Texas fans any more pumped up than they already am, because it seemed like everything went right for them this offseason.
And
adding players left and right.
No, seriously, on both sides of the ball. And, one player that I don't think is going to get enough notoriety, at least heading into redraft season, but definitely could be during the waiver wire weeks, is Denico Autry. That's another interior player who's going to be able to absorb blocks and give you more one-on-one opportunities on the outside edges to kind of help with both.
Absolutely. I'm interested to see how Autry does as a 3 technique in a 4-man defensive front. I mean, not that he didn't play that a lot in sub packages, but for a lot of his career, he was on base downs. He was a 3-4 defensive end. So it might be a little bit of a transition there, but Autry's a guy that I think is just about perennially undervalued. And he's a guy in defensive tackle required leagues. That's the kind of guy I'm kind of sniffing around in the later rounds. If I can get him as my starter instead of having to pay retail for a bigger name like Madubuike, just to throw a name out there, then I'll do that. I don't generally spend up for elite defensive tackles, although I may have to reconsider that in Butkus this year because the defensive tackles can put up some robust weekly scores. And I learned that the hard way last year. Zach Allen was my starter last year, and he wasn't terrible.
No, he wasn't.
It wasn't. Whereas the champion, Leo McNeely, he fell over backwards into Madubuike's breakout season because that's what happened for Leo last year. Everything went right. I'm not mad, Leo. I'm not mad. It's cool. We're friends.
No, I can't pick up on that. No bitterness whatsoever here.
Son of a.
We got a question from Owen. Owen, welcome to the show. What are your thoughts on Trayvon Walker? He took a step forward last season. Will this trend continue, or have we seen his best? What are your thoughts here, Gary?
Oh, I think there's still plenty of room for him to improve. And he did have a really good season last year. And he's another guy that benefits from playing opposite a really good counterpart in Josh Allen, which again keeps defenses from saying, okay, we're going to throw a double team at Trayvon Walker every play. And, when Walker came into the NFL, the Jaguars asked him to kind of do something. I mean, he had played the edge a little at Georgia, but not really like a full-time stand-up edge rusher. Was not a role he was overly familiar with. So it shouldn't be surprising that there has been a little bit of a learning curve. But hold on. Let me see where I have Walker at. And it's probably going to sound low. I think I have him at 27. And honestly, that says as much about the increased depth on the defensive line now that true position has become more the rule than the exception, than it does about Walker as a player. I mean, it used to be there weren't 25 startable defensive linemen that you could count on every week in IDP leagues. So it made it that much more important that you invest early and get at least one guy you could trust every week. I mean, now you get well into the 30s, and I'm looking at guys like, yeah, I wouldn't mind rolling that guy out. So it enables you to maybe be a little more patient with the defensive linemen and hammer those linebackers.
And not to mention, we talk about sacks, we talk about tackles, but there are plenty of other metrics that make these players more valuable, whether it's tackles for a loss or quarterback hits. I mean, it's about knowing your scoring settings and which players kind of tailor best to those. Another thing I like to look at when I look at defensive linemen for fantasy is, okay, are they boom or bust in terms of sack potential? Like if they don't get a sack, do they give me a decent tackle floor? They give me a decent tackle floor like they gave Walker in weeks 15 through 17 last year, then I'm pretty happy about that.
Right. The flip side of that coin is a guy like Yannick Ngakoue for years was a feast or famine guy. Yes, he was going to go out there and get 8, 9, 10 sacks every year, but he was also lucky to crack 35 total tackles a lot of the time. So if you didn't get that sack, again, the dreaded, no one wants to look at that stat line and see the goose egg staring back at him. So yeah, if you can give me a guy that's got a little bit of a floor where I can breathe easy every week, he's going to give me at least a few points, I'm going to have those guys ranked higher than the feast or famine ones.
I got one more question here from Jack in the chat. With Aaron Donald's retirement, who do you think could break out as an edge for the Rams? I like Byron Young as a sleeper. What are your thoughts here, Gary?
Didn't Byron Young already kind of break out?
I mean, not to Aaron levels, but
no. And he's not an interior lineman; he's an edge rusher. But I mean, you look at Byron Young, and he's a guy that I've talked up as being undervalued this year, and I'm sure I will mention him again before the summer's out. He had better numbers than Will Anderson did, statistically speaking. Scored more fantasy points than Will Anderson did. Yet you're not going to find anyone who has Byron Young ranked within probably 10 spots of Will Anderson, because Anderson got that trophy and he's got Hunter playing opposite him. So it's going to be interesting to see if Young, with not quite the supporting cast that Anderson has, if he can build on what he did in that first season and improve in year two, oh yeah, he's going to be a steal for IDP managers. I think he could be a viable DL2 that you're going to be able to get in a lot of leagues late.
Right on. Going back to our rankings here, you mentioned you had Max Crosby at 2. I have him at 3, switching over to our third at the position, edge rushers, excuse me.
So much variance. We're just all over the place, man.
Well, here's the thing. Like, I could easily see him. I know he had TJ Watt in the class in and of himself, but I could easily see him jumping to 1 because, of an addition we talked about with the Nico Autry going to Houston, how that frees up the edge rushers there. Well, Christian Wilkins is no slouch either, going from Miami to Las Vegas, being somebody who absorbs those blocks and gives, Max Crosby more one-on-one opportunities. Not like he needed, not that we were concerned about Max Crosby beating double teams last year. Like, the guy did it all. And his partner on the other side, who I have ranked a little bit outside my top 15, Malcolm Kuntz, if his trajectory continues to improve, it just gives Max Crosby all the upside in the world. So that's why he's my 3. Who's your 3?
Garrett. So that's why I said we've got such variance. We're disagreeing about everything. Cats and dogs. That's madness. That's fine.
Thanks for the analysis, fellas. You're welcome, sir. You're welcome. Okay, let's go. 4. For me, it's Nick Bosa. I think I think that he's not going to hurt from losing his counterpart in Chase Young. I don't think a lot of players are hurting because Chase Young is not on their team anymore. But the guy has just been a perennial, edge rusher and sack producer. And I really like about him is his ability to make plays and tackles for a loss and quarterback hits. He had the league lead in quarterback hits last year, which, again, depending on your scoring settings, like we at Fantasy and Frames. We like going off of the Fantasy Pro scoring settings because we to participate in their ECR competition. But like for the Butkus Kings Classic, division, there's obviously differences in points there. But I remember a couple of years.
There you get QB hits and sack yardage and all that good stuff.
Yeah. So definitely somebody that I'm obviously clearly pretty high on, having him at 4. Who's your number 4, Gary?
Bosa. Barring injury, you're not going to be at all dissatisfied with the result you'll get from him. And if anything, I think the 49ers upgraded opposite him. I mean, Leonard Floyd has been more productive the past couple of years than Chase Young. I mean, a lot of people just cling to that Chase Young second overall pick rookie of the year guy. It's been a while since we saw that guy. So, right. Floyd had 9 or 10 sacks quietly. Had 9 or 10. I think he led the Bills in sacks last year. So, yeah, Nick Bosa. The only thing you have to worry about with Bosa is injury, and you can make that case about just about everyone. He just happens to have a little bit of a history.
Yeah, right. Going to 5. Here's where things might start taking a turn in terms of debate. I have Aiden Hutchinson at 5. I just think this guy, his trajectory again is just going really, really high. Again, quarterback hits, number 2 in quarterback hits. Tackles for a loss. He was tied with 7 with sacks. 11.5 per PFF at 7. I just love this guy. I don't really know what to say about Aiden Hutchinson that hasn't already been said by all the NFL reporters and whatnot, and the team reporters. The guy just has a motor like nobody's business. And again, he's somebody who can beat blocks and can get past double teams, has a decent win rate percentage. He is number 6 according to PFF. When looking at defensive linemen as a whole, and win percentage versus offensive lineman, meaning he can beat his blocks pretty efficiently. So yeah, I'm loving him. What are your thoughts on Aiden Hutchinson? You said,
I've got him I've got him a few spots lower, but still well within DL1 territory. I'm not saying I disagree with anything he said. And he's he's not a guy who's any kind of a liability in run support either. He's not afraid to get dirty and tackle him a running back. So yeah, safely within DL1 territory. My number 5 is Micah Parsons of the Cowboys. And it's a bit of a risky pick. It really is, because, we've seen Parsons put up some gonzo games.
Right.
But I don't know that we've really seen him do it consistently enough that we get that gonzo season. But I do think that's a possibility, and that's enough for me to – he's not a guy if you're risk averse. And I know that they lost Dorrance Armstrong, but, man, his ceiling is just – he's a game wrecker. And
right.
What else is there to say?
Yeah, no. So I have Parsons at 6, and my
again, we're just
I know it's just it's so much variance. Yeah, my concern with Parsons, however, is not so much the loss of Dorrance Armstrong or DeMarcus Lawrence, who is not a threat in my opinion anymore to taking away sack upside or tackle upside. It's look, you lost your defensive coordinator to Washington. It's not Dan Quinn calling the defense anymore. So I'm a little concerned as far as like schematically what they want him to do. I believe the most recent reports that I read is have him being more of that edge rusher versus off-ball linebacker. But what we saw with Dan Quinn is that they would move him around, and that kind of helped with his tackle floor, bump up his fantasy value. With him just being a pure edge rusher, if that is what the route they're going to go, that is a little bit concerning for me.
Mike Zimmer managed to get some decent seasons out of Daniel Hunter, so
this is true. That's a very fair point.
Zimmer might not have been a great head coach, but Mike Zimmer knows defense, so I'm not especially worried about the schematic change. And I would hope, especially as a veteran defensive coordinator, that you would know how to use Parsons and his skill set, which I think means you want to rush him from inside sometimes, from kind of that off-ball linebacker spot. It's not that if he's playing that off-ball linebacker spot that he's dropping back in coverage. That would be silly.
Right.
He's just coming at that quarterback from a different angle, keeping the offensive line on their heels. So I think he'll be okay. And we seem to be pretty close. He's one spot apart on our rankings, so we seem to be. If we're not in lockstep, we're pretty close. We got the 1 foot down, just not the other one.
There you go. In college, we are tearing it up right now. Of course, you said that Aiden Hutchinson was your 6th.
No, Aiden's actually my 8th.
8th. Okay, well then who's your 6th? Who's your
my number 6? I believe is the aforementioned Daniel Hunter. It is.
Nice. No, I mean we brought up the points on Hunter earlier. Playing opposite Will Anderson, have Danico Autry in the middle. Just the guy is going to.
That could be a really good defense, sure.
On both sides of the ball, and it's one of those things where it's.
Well, and that's the thing. If Houston goes out and C.J. Stroud has an even better season than his rookie year, now he's got Stephon Diggs, and they've got Joe Mixon in the backfield, and all of a sudden that Houston offense starts scoring, 30 points a game. That just puts that much more pressure on the opponent to drop back and pass, which just means that many more pass rush opportunities for guys like Hunter and Anderson. It just all rolls down on the
hill. Okay, let's go to our next player here on the list, going to our number 7. You might say this is leftover Washington Commander fandom coming out here. I was really upset when he got traded to Chicago because you just like the guy as a person, and you just like his production, and that's Montez Sweat. He goes to Chicago, and yes, he has DeMarcus Walker on the other side, who saw an increase in production from him last year. But it didn't matter that he didn't have that opposite guy to help alleviate pressure. Montez Sweat, another guy who I believe he finished last year as the team leader in sacks for both Washington and Chicago, seeing as how he was traded on the trade deadline last year, which is ridiculous. But, another year in the system. And normally for Dynasty, I would have him higher. And this is the first time he's actually cracked my top 10 for redraft in recent memory. So I'm pretty excited about Montez Sweat and what he can do with the Bears. Another situation with the Bears where hypothetically you surrounded your quarterback, your rookie quarterback, mind you, with a lot of offensive weaponry. You did a lot of work in free agency in terms of the secondary. You have those linebackers that last year you went after. So I feel like this defense is being slept on a little bit too much. And it
wasn't a bad defense last year, especially once Montez Sweat arrived in Chicago. The Bears were a good defensive football team down the stretch.
Yeah, no, if there is a jersey I need to replace here with somebody, I may take down Robert Woods and get Montez Sweat. He is definitely one of my favorites here. Who's your 7, Gary?
I have Hassan Reddick at 7. We talked about, do you worry about a guy if he's changing teams or changing schemes we've seen Hassan Reddick do it multiple times. And this is a guy that started out his career as an off-ball linebacker because the Arizona Cardinals were
stupid.
But, once they figured out, wait a second, maybe this guy's an edge rusher. We've seen him produce in Arizona. Then he went to Philadelphia and picked up, just right where he left off.
Carolina too.
Yes, had the 1 year in Carolina, was fantastic in Philadelphia. Now he's going to the New York Jets, that's another team with you look along that defensive line, especially if they can get one of those young defensive ends on that roster to step up opposite Reddick. You got Robert Saleh running that defense, who is a keen defensive mind. I don't expect a drop off from Reddick relative to the kind of production that we've seen in Philly, Carolina, Arizona. So I expect him to finish, safely within DL1 territory again.
Nice. You already talked about your number 8, which was that Hutchinson? You had an 8?
Yes.
Okay. So mine is Danielle Hunter. So we're starting to get some variance here, and the only rationale I have for Danielle Hunter is the change in the location here, or else he would be in my top 5. But I'm not anticipating there to be too much of a drop off. But again, changing location is something that I do kind of worry about. Going to number 9, however, this is a little bit of a stretch here, but I do like Brian Burns going to New York playing opposite Kayvon Thibodeau. So he is my sneaky pick
Yeah, it
here.
ain't that sneaky because I've got him at 9 too.
Boom! All right, great minds think alike there. Are you happy with wow, Jorge talk? Are you happy with the change in team scenery here for him going to New York?
Well, I'm happy with him now playing opposite Kayvon Thibodeau as opposed to, he was kind of a one-man band in Carolina. So he saw, again, a ton of attention from opposing defenses. Now it's going to be kind of a pick your poison. Is it going to be Thibodeau? Is it going to be Brian Bird? You got Dexter Lawrence in the middle. The Giants are another team. Now their secondary might be a little shaky. But that front seven, you look at the personnel, it's not bad. Now, can they score any points at all is a whole nother story.
Right. Which makes you wonder whether or not garbage time is going to be working against Brian Burns or any of these defensive players for New York.
Because the Giants are going to win the NFC East.
There is somebody who's watching the show just was super happy you just said that, and I'm going to ignore what you just said. I think that was
I'm kidding.
yeah. I know.
Not that if I wanted to really get crazy, I'd say the Commanders are going to win it, but
I'm just going to ignore everything you just said there.
That was a little bit of a shot. Just a
little bit of a shot. Okay, just making sure.
Hey, if it makes you feel any better, I expect Dallas to be worse this year. So does that give you some pleasure?
That makes me happy. Anytime you say that the Cowboys are going to be a little bit worse this year, I'm always going to be a fan of.
I think Philly is pretty clearly the class of that division this year. Well, last year, 11 weeks in, they looked like the best team in the NFL, and look what happened. So what do I know?
This is true. All right, going to number 10 here. Again, this could be a spicy take depending on where people are ranking him. Coming off of I believe it was a biceps tear or a triceps tear in New England. The guy just does not get enough respect year after year after year since leaving Baltimore. And he's one of my guys. Again, if I could swap out one of my jerseys, and Nate knows this, Nate Markham here at Fantasy Frames knows this very well. It's Matt Judon. I think he's going to come back. He's going to have a great year in New England. I think he's going to come back fully healthy and just pick up where he left off. When we're looking at production here, going back using Fantasy Pros metrics for scoring, he had 3 tackles and a sack for 11 points, 4 tackles and a sack for 15, 5 tackles, 2 sacks for 18. Go back and look, the previous few years for Matt Judon. That has been the consistent theme here. And he just got sidelined, I think, by a bad injury. But I think he comes back here and continues to dominate just like he had in previous years. What are your thoughts on Matt Judon here, Gary?
I've got him several spots lower. He's outside my top 15, but inside my top 20. Last year, I loved Matt Judon. When John Norton sniped me in Butkus, I was madder about Judon than I was about Nate taking Kevin Byard away from me. I was hot about Judon, and then he got hurt. And with that, that's really my concerns. Or the injury, his age, he is the wrong side of 30, and playing for maybe the worst team in the NFL. I hoped from the time the season ended right up until the NFL draft that some contender would come along and, plunk down a second or third round pick for Judon so he could get a better situation. Because you look at what he did in 2021 and 2022, his numbers were fantastic. So we know he's capable. It's just, it's a little bit of a risk for me inside the top 10. But I see why. I probably had him inside my top 10 last year. And if I didn't, he was just outside. And what I loved so much about him last year was that he was a guy that you're going to be able to get later than that. And that's going to be the case this year because a lot of people, they see, I think Judon's 31.
Right.
They see a guy that's that wrong side of 30 coming off a season-ending injury, and it makes them reluctant to draft him. And those guys start dropping down the board, and it reaches a point where I'll snatch them. I'm willing. At some point in the draft, I'm willing to take a risk on just about anybody.
And that's a very good point. And I think that's something that fantasy managers have to take into consideration is that you can listen to Gary's ratings, you can listen to mine, you can listen to so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, you have to put your own evaluation on who you think is a worthwhile fantasy pick for you as we head into redraft season in a month or so. And if you think that Judon is somebody that, for example, is like I have him in the top 10, but the site that you're using, their ADP has them outside the top 20 or so, that's great for you because you're using your site's ADP to your advantage and being able to grab, from your evaluation, a top 10 talent outside the top 20 in terms of ADP. So something to pay attention to. We got Sean here in the chat. Shh, I'm hoping everyone forgets about Judon during drafts. I hope so too. I
haven't forgotten him. I haven't forgotten him. 28. He had 28 sacks in 2021, 2022. That's kind of hard to forget.
Yeah, very much so. Who's your 10, Gary?
My number 10 is the aforementioned Montez Sweat, who I expect, like you said, to just pick up right where he left off last year in Chicago. That defense is underrated. I think Sweat's underrated as a talent, and it wouldn't surprise me if he finishes closer to where you have him ranked than to where I have him ranked. And he's another guy that I expect may well drop a little bit. You might be able to get Sweat around that DL 15 range. And if you can get a top 7 or 8 guy, he finishes that high in DL2 territory, then you're going to be, that means either you've got really good linebackers or your defensive line is just loaded, or you were able to grab extra offensive talent. That's value is what fantasy football is all about. Getting guys that score higher than the slot you drafted them in. That's how you win. It's that simple.
100%. 100%. As we go into our final 5 here, my number 11 is Will Anderson. I just think the addition of Danielle Hunter is going to boost his productivity. Like you said earlier, he's the rookie defensive player of the year for a reason, and you just gave him an interior defensive lineman to help take away double teams. You added a bookend defensive end to help take away double teams. There's so much talent with this young man, and it's like we said, this team is going to be in a position potentially, if the offense does what we think it's going to do, to pin their ears back and just go after these quarterbacks in passing situations. And with so much attention, I think, being brought to Danielle Hunter's side, that Will Anderson is just in a great spot to tear it up. And so I have him at 11. Where do you have Anderson?
I have Anderson one spot lower. I have him at 12. I have Josh Allen at 11.
Damn it, you and I are flip-flopping all over the place because I have Josh Allen at 12 and you have Anderson.
Last year may well be the best we're ever going to see out of Allen. I don't know that there's going to be a lot more 17 and a half sack seasons, 66 total tackles. I mean, it kind of got lost a little bit because the Jaguars fell apart down the stretch, but Allen was phenomenal. And you've got Trayvon, and maybe that kind of coincided with Trayvon Walker starting to come into his own, and once again taking that pressure off Allen. But if I could get Allen as a low end DL1, get him as the 10th or 11th defensive lineman off the board, because I've been hitting linebackers early, which I tend to do. I like to get one high end defensive lineman that I know I can trust, which now you can wait a little longer to do that because guys like Allen are available in the 10 to 12 range. And my DL2, I'll rotate a little bit sometimes. It depends on how the draft plays out. And that way I can just stack linebackers like firewood. Although, again, in Buckus, I may have to rethink it because I did that last year. And the big play guys in Buckus, I'm going to give you a little help since this is going to be your first year. Those big play guys can put up just 55, 60 points in a week if you get a guy that's got like 2 sacks. Yes, Sean, you're right. Allen was chasing that big payday, and he caught it. But it certainly wouldn't be the first time that we saw a contract year guy not live up to what he did the year before. But like I said, I don't necessarily expect him to. If he goes out and gets 17 and a half sacks again, then he should be in the defensive player of the year conversation.
Right. So agree for real football, but for fantasy, again, I think going back to what I was saying earlier is like, I guess, obviously sacks are a defining metric that we look at to evaluate overall production. You don't get points or pressures, you do get points depending on, quarterback hits and tackles for a loss. And that's where he really excelled last year. He was number 5 in tackles for a loss. When it came to quarterback hits, he was number 2 in quarterback hits. In terms of being a one and done year, I don't know. I look at his efficiency numbers, 20% win rate, which has him as the 8th best defensive lineman in all of football in the NFL. I think what you saw was not an aberration. I think he's
all I know is anytime a guy gets over 65 tackles and 15 sacks, you have my undivided attention.
Undivided attention. Absolutely.
You are on the list.
All right, we got 3 more to go. At 13, I have a guy who's requested a trade from his team and may not even show up for training camp on time because he's wanting to get out of Cincinnati. And I'm going with Trey Hendrickson. I love everything about him. 2 years ago, I was concerned about, the being sack or bust thing here, but the tackle numbers have gone up. Last year, I was concerned was it Miles Murphy, who is the rookie that they drafted, taking snaps away from him and or Sam Hubbard. Again, not concerned this year. We saw he still maintained a good tackle floor, and the sack production was there. But I know he's requesting a trade. Does he get out of there? Where does he go? How does that impact?
Anywhere.
You don't think so? You think they're going to find a way?
I don't expect the Bengals. This is a Bengals team that's looking to make a Super Bowl run. I mean, I think they're doing the same thing with Henderson that they are with T. Higgins. I think on some level, and the 49ers, unless someone blows their doors off with an offer for Ayuk, I don't expect Brandon Ayuk to go anywhere. These teams realize that probably after this season, after the 2024 season, those guys are gone. But they're going to keep them while they have them and make a run at winning a ring because, ain't that the point of the whole thing? I've given up on bagging on Trey Henderson. I don't have him ranked that highly, but, it used to be I'd say, well, yeah, he got 13 and a half sacks, but he only had 37 tackles. Can he back up the sack numbers 3 years in a row? He just keeps making me wrong. So Trey Henderson is an excellent edge rusher, and that's why the Bengals aren't going to let him go. I mean, you can't. What would they replace him with at this point in the offseason? There's nothing there. I like Sam Hubbard as a player, but he's not a number 1 edge rusher. He's a strong side, run stuff at end who will get you maybe 7 or 8 sacks. Whereas you got Henderson as your 15 sack linchpin pass rusher that the Saints probably kick themselves time and time again for ever letting leave to begin with.
Yep. 100% all aboard. So who's your 13 then?
My number 13 is my highest ranked interior lineman. Let's give the big uglies a little bit of credit. DeForest Buckner of the Indianapolis Colts. And a nice tackle floor, has shown the ability to post double-digit sacks. Another off defensive line that if you look up and down that defensive line, you got Grover Stewart, you got Kwity Paye, you got Samson Ebukam, who came in, had the best year of his career last year. They were the first team to draft an edge rusher this year in Latu out of UCLA. I mean, that's a lot of talent. The ends, I worry a little bit about snap counts because there's so much talent that I think there's going to be a lot of rotation. But I think DeForest Buckner will be out there just about all the time. And while we do not have that unquestionable king of the defensive tackles anymore, because number 99 rode off into the sunset, Buckner is my highest ranked one this year. It's going to be interesting to see how long managers wait in defensive tackle required leagues before we start seeing that run at the position. Because, that first tier, there's 4 or 5 guys that are pretty close together. So maybe you'll be able to get a guy like Buckner or a Quentin Williams. I definitely think you'll be able to get a discount because his numbers weren't great last year. But I think you might be able to get tackles at a bit of a discount this year just because there isn't that no doubt number 1 elite guy that everyone lusts after like we did Aaron Donald for so many years.
100%. I have DeForest Buckner as my 15. So again, not too far away. Going to 14. I mentioned his name earlier. I was pretty high on him when down the stretch 2 seasons ago. Playing opposite Cameron Jordan was, just lights out in terms of fantasy production. as well as in tackles in the sack department last year. He was just consistent again. I like Carl Granderson. I can't. He's one of my guys. He much like a Montez Sweat, although not to Sweat's level. Just as somebody who I think is going to get the snaps, is going to get that production, and just fits in well. He is. How do I put this? He is my Jonathan Grenard to Will Anderson from last year. Like, not somebody who's going to blow the doors down, but somebody who can give me consistent production versus having streaky upside. And to be honest with you, as I'm looking at them, I probably should have DeForest Buckner ahead of Granderson now that I'm looking at that, making insert change now. Yeah. So.
Oh, man, I don't even – I'm going to change my rankings so many times between now and – I'll look back on my June rankings by like the second week of August and just be like, what the hell was I thinking? Was I drunk when I did these?
Yeah, it is. Well, we did say earlier in the show, folks, these are our early defensive linemen.
Yes, very early.
Exactly. As
much can and will change.
Yes, exactly. Who is your 14?
My 14 is the aforementioned Trey Hendrickson. Like I said, I give up. I try to find a reason not to rank Trey Hendrickson that high every year, and every year Trey Hendrickson would make me look bad. So I surrender, man. You win. You're a top 15 defensive lineman. Congratulations.
Nice.
I tip my cap to you, sir.
And Gary, the godfather of IDP, to round us out here for tonight at 15. Who is your number 15 defensive lineman / edge rusher?
This is the part of the rankings where there's literally like half a dozen guys that I could put in that spot, including Judon. Right now, I have Kayvon Thibodeau there.
Oh, wow.
And it might be a little bit of a risky play, but we know the talent is there with Thibodeau, and we've seen flashes both at Oregon and in the NFL where it seems like he's unstoppable. What we haven't seen is him put together a month of that, 6 weeks of that, a season of that. And I'm hoping that maybe Brian Burns' arrival will kind of unlock that. And again, they've got Dexter Lawrence in the middle, a very good defensive tackle. So that front four, well, three, but four, it's usually four. It's always four because everyone's in the nickel all the time.
Right.
It should be pretty stout. So I think this is the year that Thibodeau has a coming out party. Wouldn't be surprised to see him outpoint Burns, honestly. I have Burns ranked a little higher, but they're pretty close together. Wouldn't surprise me if Thibodeau outranked him. Wouldn't surprise me if Thibodeau cracked the top 10. Unfortunately, it also wouldn't surprise me if he finished outside the top 20. So he's one of those. Once you start getting into that 15 to 20 to 25 range, the questions. Guys have upside, but they also have questions, and that's just the nature of the position. And that's all the more argument for, get one of those top 5 or 6 or 7 guys. Those guys that really were the only thing that's going to derail their season is if they get hurt. You get one of those guys to anchor your defensive line, and then maybe you circle back a little later and get a Thibodeau or a Carl Granderson, who should be available much later than DL15. I will be stunned if Granderson comes off the board as a top 15 defensive line. I'd be surprised if he come off in the top 20. I mean, that's a guy you might be able to get in DL3 territory in some leagues. Obviously not leagues with Jorge, because he's going to be lurking in the weeds, just lurking. You'll see that tail pop out of the savannah, just kind of waving back and forth. And then you'll hear, Carl Granderson.
And I'll be coming around the corner like, who said that? Where? What? Speaking of, you hit the nail right on the head there. Like, we do get into some question marks. And speaking of question marks, we have a question from Sean in the chat about a question about a player. He says, no Dorrance Armstrong in the top 15. For me, look, I hope he turns – look, the snaps are going to be there, obviously. He's going to be the number one edge rusher for Washington. He has the familiarity with Dan Quinn and the defense he'll be employing there. But there is a huge difference between being the third in the pecking order of one team to going to being the number one of another team. And the big question there is, can he handle that? Can he do that? What is going to be the situation here? I think he's landing in a good spot because you got Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne in the middle kind of absorbing some of these blocks. So it's definitely an opportunity for Dorrance Armstrong to take advantage of. I just don't feel comfortable enough because I haven't seen enough to say, yes, just because of snaps by itself, he is worthy of being that highly ranked.
I agree. I think there's just steadier guys ahead of him. Is the potential there? I mean, if Armstrong goes out and puts up the kind of per snap productivity in Washington that he did in Dallas the last couple of seasons, then he's going to be a huge breakout and a massive value for the people that draft him. Because again, that's a guy who's probably going to come off the board at a low end DL2, high end DL3, 22 to 28 range. I'm spitballing average because it's still so early. And, if we start hearing glowing training camp reports about how Armstrong looks unstoppable in shorts and shells.
DL1, baby. I'm just kidding. No.
But, I'm right there with you. I just, again, there's that major question. Can he do playing 875, 900 snaps what he was able to do playing 450 or 500 snaps?
Right.
And that other edge spot in Washington is kind of a question mark. And how good are the Commanders going to be this year? I mean, I expect them to be improved. There's really nowhere to go but up. And I like Jaden Daniels. I thought that was a great pick. Was so glad they took him ahead of Drake May because I thought Daniels was clearly the number 2 quarterback in the draft class. And I think he can make the argument that he was the best quarterback in the draft class. But I know everyone believes that was Caleb Williams. But, are the Commanders going to have enough positive game scripts where Armstrong's going to be able to get after the quarterback enough to, get us a 55 tackle, 11 sack season?
Right. Nope.
I don't know that I can see like Armstrong getting 15, 16, 17 sacks. And maybe I've been wrong before. I'm sure it's not hard to go back and find receipts for it.
If anything, if that were to happen, I would think that would be like years 2, 3, and so on and so forth. I mean, I think you're going to see what you got, right? First year handling all those snaps, and we'll see if his win rate efficiency is there. But no, to all the points you just brought up, that's why and this is a Commanders fan who can be somewhat blinded by passion.
At least he's playing for, he's when we talk about schemes, he knows the defense he's going to backwards and forwards.
Right. Okay, so that's going to wrap up our episode today, talking about our early top 15 defensive linemen / edge rushers in redraft. Gary Davenport, man, it is always a pleasure talking to you, whether it's on a pod or just hanging out with you on Twitter or just texting it back and forth. Really a quality person in the fantasy football industry that I'm very proud to call a friend. Tell the folks what you're working on, where can they find you, and anything else you want to talk about for that matter.
Oh, best way to find my work is just follow me on Twitter at IDP Sharks. I will have the first edition of my summer fantasy IDP stock watch at Football Guys will be out, I think, next Monday. And, as the farther as we move into July, and my last couple articles at Football Guys were more just general strategy, like how to incorporate IDPs in your fantasy football league, how to convince the offense-loving weirdos that IDPs are not the scary or whatever. And the last one I did was, the danger of chasing last year's numbers, going after what has happened instead of what will happen. But as we move into July and then into August, that's when most of my stuff starts to be more just meat and potatoes. Like, okay, I think these guys are undervalued, like by 5 for 5. I think these guys are overvalued. Stay away from these guys. And then at some point in August, I'll do my round by round draft blueprint at Football Guys like I do every year, which always winds up, I look back on it and I'm like, no. But, and it's kind of hard because you never know how, and I try to tell people that you just never know how an IDP league is how the draft's going to go. I mean, you can have one where the first IDP don't come off the board till the back end of the 7th round, and then have the exact same scoring system, exact same setup, and 12 other managers, and the first IDP come off early in round 4. I mean, I can tell you that in Butkus, be ready for the IDP to come off early because it's going to, I think it was 13th overall pick last year was the first one. And round 2, there was a decent sized run on IDPs. I think I drafted my first IDP in round 2 last year, Roquan.
That's pretty damn good one to go after right there. As somebody who is honored and humbled to be able to take part in the Kings Classic Butkus division, I am looking forward to
it's going to be
to locking horns. It's going to
it's awesome.
No Leo, anybody but Leo this year. Shout out to Master IDP, the best
Leo.
Is
proverbially. I'm speaking metaphorically. I don't actually want Leo to die. Much.
Yeah, much, exactly.
Hey, he went 13-1. He beat me twice, including in the championship game. I'm allowed to be bitter. I'm supposed to be bitter. I'm not supposed to be happy about that.
You're
and
not
I'm
wrong. Not. Gary, it is always fun talking shop with you. For those out there, please, thank you for watching and subscribing to wherever you listen to podcasts or watch this video. We really appreciate you tuning in. Again, go back to wherever you listen to a podcast and on our YouTube channel to listen to all the other shows that you've heard here on Fantasy and Frames Wednesday. Tomorrow night on Thursday, we have Fantasy Football Weekly at 8 p.m. where we cover just what's going on in the fantasy space this week, as well as our draft show with Stacey Perez at 9 p.m. Eastern. We got a lot of people showing up. Special guest for this mock draft. It's going to be another Scott Fishbowl mock draft, so stay tuned for that. Make sure to head over to fantasyandframes.com to check out all of our articles and rankings. Next week, JT will be back, and we'll be talking about our early defensive backs, and then we'll get into some division previews. Before you know it, yes, folks, we're already talking division previews. It is. We're getting there. We're not there yet to the time of year where everybody's going to be like super, super excited, but we're getting there, and we guarantee you, if anything else, you're going to have a good time hanging out with all of us. And so, Gary, again, thank you so much for your time. And for everybody else out there, you all have a great evening.